So today we're talking about jobs, employment, the impact of the pandemic and the like. And Terry Shelton and Kurt Sipple have done a fantastic job, as usual, of getting panelists for us. And so I'll turn it over to Terry.
Well, thanks very much, Dennis. And I think those of you who have it on some screen can see that we also are joined with Scott Resnick. We're going to have two people in person, and I've got sort of a summary of things from a third. We're going to start out with Scott and then move to Tim Casper, who is at Madison College. Scott can be able to give us some ideas about the future of jobs and his background. And then Tim, and then I'll wrap up with some information from Jay Lowy, who's been running QTI, a human resources operation in the region for the last 30 years. So Scott, former alder, entrepreneur extraordinaire, kicked off I'm sure many of you are familiar with Starting Block, the entrepreneurial hub that he and others, the partnerships that he put together, and including with George Austin from the Overture Center, as well as MG&E and other partners, to make that place, partnerships also with American Family, where of course they're now housed in that big Spark building with AmFam. And Scott, what did you guys end up with? About 3 floors there?
We have 4 floors there.
Wow. Well, and also many of you may also have voted for him back in 2015, I think. And I'm sure sometime we're going to see it a little bit more of that. He's got a 2.5-year-old running around, and I have 2.5-year-old twins running down around me. We're both in attics. So Scott, tell us what the future of work is, what you've done, and what your futuristic ideas about this are.
I don't know if I have any futuristic ideas, but I certainly have quite a few thoughts when you think about the future of work. And thank you so much for just inviting me to talk about a topic that I enjoy speaking about. This will be a conversation here. I assume that this will be a discussion. I'm going to throw out a few different trends that we're seeing, both in Madison, but across the United States, on how work has changed. And as we all know, because we're doing this all virtually, what the pandemic has done, what we've essentially learned over the last year, and sort of what trends are we seeing into 2021, 22, and 23. So there will be about 10 minutes, 15 minutes of presentation, and then we can go into a discussion and happy to answer any questions that you may have. So let's dive right in. Sort of the 5 trends that I'm seeing right now in the future of work, and we'll start with number 1 here. If we move on to the next slide, the pandemic set in a motion and trends, essentially to say this is going to be the age of the everything. Out of necessity, we saw a number of different industries move forward into telecommunications, into essentially jumping in to see what can we accomplish virtually. So some of these areas that we think about regularly, we think about teleeducation as we're having this conversation over Zoom, telehealth, teletherapy. But what we're finding is these trends, which were somewhat nascent early on, before 2020, have really taken off in meaningful ways. I'm now thinking about, when was the last time that you were in a physical bank, and what you can now do with banking over a mobile and online platform. If you're thinking about gyms, as you hear about Peloton and online interactions to be active in mobile. Insurance has gone entirely mobile, where that agent that you would meet with, 10, 15 years ago, now is not only conducting the entire interaction online, but using digital tools for that engagement, and everything from diagnostics in the health space and therapy space. So we're seeing this move, as many industry experts have framed it, a 10-year fast forward in what the natural trends would be toward tele, as well as in the e-commerce boom. And I will tell you, I still have not had my groceries delivered online, but as something is now you see everything from DoorDash, services from Amazon, so much of commerce is going online. We ended up seeing a 40% increase in total online commerce. So yes, essentially, both the services like Amazon that have gained market share, but new services, essentially everything from Best Buy, Walmart, traditional retailers now taking a strong focus in moving commerce online. The second big trend in the future of work is we're talking about working remotely. As we go in the next slide, prior to 2000, we saw roughly a little bit under 4 million individuals that were working essentially remotely. This is essentially individuals who were already working primarily, whether it's over Teams and over Slack, had a position which had the freedom to be remote. And as we saw with many professional fields, this expanded drastically during the pandemic. Well over 75 million individuals, still continued with work, but it ended up going online. Everything from, I'm not saying anything new, everything from our teachers, our educators, state government employees, jobs that we probably would have imagined, near impossible to make that shift. Now, in 2022, I don't see 100% of our teachers or even 95% of our teachers continuing to work remotely. I don't see our educators at the university or state government employees taking that leap where we'll still continue to see a primary goal of telecommunication, work. But we will estimate that roughly 20 million, 500% increase will continue to work remotely and really allowed to work anywhere in the United States. And what we may also see is a hybrid model where while employers are encouraging individuals to be able to be in the office, we're seeing work from the office 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and not a complete transition back to a fully fledged workforce in person. What that means for cities as we get into the third sort of general area is there was a general thought and notion that cities would collapse under a work from home scenario. And, I'll use the two superstar cities as we think about it, New York City and San Francisco, communities that already had the highest cost of living. You would have seen a massive exodus. Why live in Brooklyn at an 800 square foot, 2-bedroom apartment, family with 2 kids? Why put yourself through that, if you could work from anywhere? And what we saw in general workforce trends is there were individuals that were choosing to leave major metropolitan cities. And it was primarily over 3 general reasons. One, loss of employment was a major factor of an individual leaving a city. But essentially the second and third factors, second being cost, but third being childcare, we ended up seeing that there were cities that dropped in population, but it was not as massive as one would otherwise think. One of the pieces that we did notice through these drops and these trends, suburbia became just as popular as it was in the 1970s and 80s. Individuals were looking for homes over condominiums and over apartments, but we did see regionally individuals not leaving a given region. What we did see over the last year, though, was a massive drop in immigration. And this is where, cities like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, do see a relative population boost. If you're looking at the total net numbers, the addition and subtraction of a workforce, assuming that, we have a sort of a constant flow of immigration, And the combination of policies at the national level, plus a pandemic, which shut down almost all immigration, truly did create a net impact for the cities. There were a few cities that ended up gaining, in relative nature to others. The two that sort of bucketed together that did incredibly well during this period, one were essentially college towns, and the other one being those luxury communities that had a natural element to their communities themselves. Think of a Jackson Hole, Tahoe, Miami, either for purposes of beaches or mountains. You saw individuals moving there, as well as places of strong culture, strong cost of living, and college communities. One piece of data, this is on my next slide, which shows the outflow of tech workers. And if you see, actually the largest per capita gain of this space was actually Madison, Wisconsin. So the consequences of that, cost of living in Madison are likely to go up. Cost of housing relative what Madisonians are used to has increased. Right now, we have probably one of the strongest housing, robust sellers markets in the Madison area that we've probably seen since the mid 2000s. But there's a flow to primarily well-kept, strong communities with primarily progressive values. Fourth of my 5 trends I'm going to just mention are the gig economy. So the gig economy is essentially independent contractor work that essentially can come into vogue in the last 15 to 20 years. These are primarily jobs that your hours are not set. They're companies that you've heard of, like Uber, like DoorDash, like Lyft, Eat Street drivers, individuals that are picking up temporary work essentially for additional income. The gig economy grew substantially over the pandemic period. And here we are seeing upwards of 60 million individuals that are now participating in the gig economy in some way, shape, or form. Now, this might be someone who's working, selling a product on Etsy as a side gig. There might be someone who's driving for Uber or participating in some way in that economy. And we're seeing it now becoming the primary source of income for right around 25 million Americans across the country. Now, this has drastic implications as well for society. When you think of both the pros and the cons, there is a pro certainly of being able to have supplementary income as you're either raising a family or being able to do something else with excess time. That's a positive. There's a certain amount of flexibility and independence that goes along with that. But as a level of concern, those individuals who are independent contractors often are struggling to obtain health insurance, often are obtaining additional costs. For example, driving with Uber or Lyft, there's a wear and tear on your personal vehicle that Uber or Lyft is not taking responsibility for. And what this will do long-term to our social safety nets, things like Medicare, Medicaid, what this will do for Social Security, what this will do, what the ramifications will be, 20 to 30 years down the line as individuals are retiring after basing their entire income on the gig economy, are certainly policy decisions that need to be tackled. And lastly, as I think through the future of work, the inequality gaps have certainly been exacerbated by the pandemic. And although the Biden stimulus package, I think, does an excellent job to start reinventing those social safety nets, primarily around childcare and health insurance, we are going to see this gap widen. And primarily, it's a gap on socioeconomic levels and as well as education levels that probably have some correlation to it. If you are in a professional field, if you are well educated, if you have the opportunity to be mobile, this next wave of employment is certainly beneficial for you. You are seeing opportunities to be able to acquire a home. You can see the opportunities to be able to have a more spacious lifestyle. There are benefits at the upper end. Well, at the lower end of the spectrum, you're seeing quite serious questions with the dignity of work. Is you're going into the gig economy of individuals who, how do we create a respect for that work that we are performing as individuals? And how do we be compensated for that said work? We're truly seeing certain gaps, and it's certainly also, trending a line across both genders as well as racially. So what does this mean for our communities of the places where we live? I see this next wave of being a true opportunity for those who are trying to start Main Street businesses. As I think to myself, personally, what are the habits and decisions that I'm going to make in the next year? I haven't thought to myself, wow, I really need more Zoom conversations in my life. I haven't thought to myself, wow, I wish I could spend more time inside my home. I'm excited to travel. I'm excited to see family. I planned my first vacation to see my 89-year-old grandmother here in April as the vaccine comes out. So this will have ramifications for our cities. I see essentially the roaring 20s on the horizon, which will mean that there will be a surplus of cash to be able to be spent inside the economy. But there will be other consequences to this all, particularly of those who are still recovering, as we see different issues with the opioid epidemic still ravaging our communities, as we see issues with mental health and depression. I will say this will be a very good time period for many, but not all in our society. So with that, I would just love to have a discussion on this topic, and I'm here to answer questions.
Yeah, well, how you mentioned Madison, of course. We're great situated for housing and people coming in, but what does this mean literally in terms of what Madison might be facing on these other things? I mean, the diversity. The thing that comes up a lot about this is the diversity issues that were existing prior to this with Madison, and now we have this other exacerbating situation. How do you see Madison situated on some of these other fronts you mentioned?
Well, Madison, if you are a high-tech worker moving into Madison, or you're preparing to retire in Madison, thinking about selling your home, there's going to be individuals that are going to be benefiting from this tremendous growth. On the racial and equity front, one of the jarring statistics that I look at, there's sort of two big issues that we need to tackle as a community. And one of those is, as we look at the net migration, we're actually seeing an inflow of African-American and Hispanic, Asian Americans moving into the Madison community over 1 year gaps. So we're seeing that same exact inflow, actually at a better rate than we would traditionally see our Caucasian inflow into the city. What should be disturbing, though, is the net outflow is equally as large for those individuals of color. So it's individuals that are moving into the community, taking jobs in the community, going to places like the University of Wisconsin, into Epic, into American Family Insurance and our major employers, but then also choosing to leave the community as well. And so while we're capturing much of the Caucasian inflow into Madison, we are not capturing that of other racial minorities. So that's at the middle income level. The other jarring statistic is about upward mobility. And this is work from Richard Reeves and other economists that essentially look at, based on your socioeconomic quintile, where you're born, and how do you move through social mobility, those individuals who are Black or Hispanic in Madison are not moving at the same level of their white peer counterparts even if you hold for economic status. So this is a reflection of what investments we do need to make in the opportunity gap, as well as the education gap, primarily at the pre-K as well as K through 12 level.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you see might be coming out of the stimulus or the recovery, whichever term you want to say, the Biden money? Can you tell us a bit more about how you see that filtering down either for people in the gig economy or others in terms of this equity?
So some of the most impressive components of the Biden plan is essentially its components to actually address poverty. It's a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. So I will tell you that as I've just spent time looking at this package, there's no facet of the economy that in some way isn't touched. I think the pieces that will become permanent over time are the child tax credits that essentially will be providing tax credits upwards of $7,000 to $9,000 for a family of 4 with children that are on the lowest ends of the economic ladder. You also see various caps to Obamacare that will essentially allow individuals to purchase onto the exchanges for a truly subsidized rate. You're also seeing dollars that are going to be filtering into cities, counties, and communities. So upwards of $350 billion flowing into our communities. The city of Milwaukee, I just saw the city of Milwaukee numbers were $400 to $500 million, and Madison is in the ballpark of $100 million. Just in direct support for communities. You're going to see even more when you start calculating in what residents are going to find. And in general, I started to try to calculate what that will mean for just the Madison public school system. It will allow, roughly 3,000 children who are currently experiencing poverty to actually ascend out of that level, which will have a tremendous benefit, for our schools and as we talk about those equity gaps.
So you have a 2.5-year-old daughter, is that correct?
Son, yes.
Son.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm surprised Liam has not joined this conversation.
And so let's say he decides that he's not in one of those professional careers. What's the future for someone who wants to be a trades, a carpenter? We're going to have Tim Casper on. Based on what you just scenario did, what's the future for the trades?
So right now what I will say is there's sort of 2 fronts to it. We are seeing automation impact every single community, each single community, whether it's AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. What that may mean for the trades is the trades profession is prefabrication or 3D printing to what that will impact of the trades will have a certain effect. There's going to be mathematics and science are still going to be required inside every single field. However, right now, if you were to just look at trends in workforce development, still going into carpentry, going into plumbing, going into becoming an electrical engineer are still some of the most prominent jobs that you would be able to find either with an apprenticeship program or a technical degree. I wouldn't underscore the fact that those are going to be jobs that will also find different elements that are going to change in the next 10 to 15 years. Even how electronics are being introduced to those places of work today, you're going to see different migrations into what technical acumen is going to be needed in every single field.
Do you see a greater uptick for wages then for service economy kind of workers for those kind of fields, or will that be done by you think it'll be immigrants who are taking those trades?
So I just planned this scenario out with what's called a virtual kitchen, and this is something that I really couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. And this is actually a component of truly a kitchen that a restaurant that you order through Eat Street or Grubhub that does not have a physical location or presence. It allows you to put your commercial kitchen literally anywhere. And Yes, as my son is actually joining. Yes, as my son is actually joining.
Mom, I'm talking.
Yeah,
Where, Mom?
We're not talking to Grandma here. Terry might look like Grandpa, but no, I'm giving a class. Could we go downstairs and play with Tommy?
No,
We talked about you. We talked about you.
Black iPad.
Yeah.
Talking.
Yeah. Go ask Tommy for the black eye.
Grandpa has no hair.
Yeah. So, but a virtual kitchen that essentially is the entire restaurant becomes virtual. You never see the kitchen staff. You never meet the kitchen staff. What does that do for their wages when you think about tipping? What does that do with the dignity of work, or when you're thinking about political decisions on should there be a living wage? If you actually never are able to interact or see that individual, it also allows prices to decrease. If your restaurant can now be located anywhere in your community, what does that do for the entire ecosystem? I will say I still am going to enjoy going to restaurants. It is something that I miss. So I don't think every restaurant will turn into a virtual kitchen, but I certainly see that as a component.
A question here about wages. Now that we can live anywhere, you just described, Cleveland, Madison, but I work. Kurt, I know you've got people in New Zealand, Brazil, Austin, wherever. The wage competition. I'd be curious for both of you in terms of this, Kurt, because of technology is one of those things, one of those fields. If now I have to compete nationally instead of a local wage, in some places that means I'm going to be paying my folks more, I assume, because I'm competing nationally. But it could also mean that the national wage for this, for example, tech, in Madison, I assume it's a pretty high wage because, it's a hot thing. But nationally, some wages, if you're competing instead of a local geographic, I assume some wages will go down if you compete nationally, and some might go up. Kurt, what do you do?
We haven't seen a change right now, but I suspect that'll happen. I suspect they'll equalize across the country more.
Do you think you're paying more in Madison for tech people than if I was in Columbus, or I was in Nashville, or I was in Tucson?
I think those are pretty equal already. Although in some of the large, actually, Wisconsin and Madison in particular is actually less than some of the large metropolitan areas, a bit less.
So you might have to pay more to have your tech workers.
Probably.
When they start.
Probably over time. Yes.
And Scott, is there careers where you could see it either from a Madison perspective actually going up or down in terms of national wages where we compete?
Certainly. I think actually, though, as I also run a tech company, what I imagine that we will be seeing is those from San Francisco, New York, being compensated San Francisco and New York wages coming to Madison. So how that impacts our housing market, how that impacts cost of living or other services like childcare or schooling, all of those will be factors.
Well, my son, who is here, and his family moved from Houston during all of this, and I would say that his Houston wages at a university there are probably higher than UW-Madison. And I think that's interesting. If they decide to live in Madison, that'll be that same kind of situation, what those wages mean and how that goes.
I think that
Scott,
there's going to be a combination of how that's going to impact, because if you think about Houston and Madison, or let's imagine that individual is working in Houston, living in Madison, those are high quality jobs that are are in the bedrock of the Houston community. Now, Houston has a large enough space that can be able to distribute that workforce. It's a different conversation if that's Cincinnati or Cleveland, and that high professional paying job is choosing to live in Madison, when would otherwise be a much more higher impact if they were living in another community.
Scott, what do you see for co-working space? What do you think that's going to do for the co-working space where you guys are at, like, starting block?
Yeah, I'll just say managing a 50,000 square foot co-working space during the pandemic, it was not the greatest thing in the world. There was truly a struggle, and while I do believe individuals are going to want to work again in close proximity, I see a potential of it coming back stronger than ever. But I will say during the pandemic, it truly was a struggle to keep the lights on. And many community co-working spaces, particularly those who are nonprofits, as well as true community feels. So I'm talking about not WeWork. Those struggled mightily throughout the pandemic, and many of them were forced to shut down.
Well, Kurt, along those lines with it, and thanks for joining us, Tim. We'll get you in a second. But one of the things, Kurt, about the flexible employer, compressing work time together. A lot of millennials at this point believe that 32 hours is a full-time week. My daughter-in-law just has a new full-time job, and it's 32 hours a week, and it's a very nice salary for 32 hours a week. But things are compressed. The starting and ending times are changing. The job sharing things are changing, even seasonal. What are you seeing, Kurt, in terms of the flexibility your folks need? One of them is on LinkedIn with me who used to work for you, and he's got a new job somewhere. And I said, how is it going for his 4th anniversary? He said, hey, I'm working from home. What can I complain about? I don't have to drive. I'm doing great. So what's the flexibility mean for the future like that?
So we're, for our company, since we're primarily a support organization, we've actually had to expand hours. We've hired people in different time zones now to cover work. We just hired somebody in Alaska last week because of that. So we have somebody that starts in Ireland at early in the morning, and somebody else matches up here, and now we're going further west. So that I think you're probably going to see. I think you're probably going to see the work-home life balance shift, right? I mean, I think we're already seeing that. So.
Yep. One of the other things I think that is in this, what you're saying also, Scott, I think is the adjusted. People would let employees take off a half day, 4 hours or 8 hours, and I think we're going to also be seeing more of take a 2 hour off as opposed to the 4 or the 8 because of that kind of flexibility. And I don't know if that's a reflection of bringing from the gig economy and those entrepreneurs, or it's just that we've seen, as you said, we've leapfrogged some of those things. So let's move. We're gonna move from the gig economy and there was to Madison College and the 2-year careers, and there was, Tim, already a question about the picture that Scott painted about the future for the types of professional workers, and there was already a question about I posted in terms of his 2.5-year-old son, what career is going to be out there for trades. But we're really happy Tim Casper can join us. Dennis and I are happy to have, and Kurt too. We're all La Follette, and Tim is a La Follette alum. Long, even though he still looks very young, he's had a long career. I think you're about almost 10 years at DOA. Worked for Doyle as his policy person. You were deputy at Revenue. Let's see, what else did you do? And I think you're coming up with a 10-year anniversary at Madison College. You were there, started in 2011, and I'm not going to say you were delivering papers and coffee as a policy person, but started out as a communications, public affairs, and then went on to do budget, special assistant to the president, and now let's see, it's vice president for, I have it here somewhere, executive vice president for all kinds of things. But we're curious about the future of work And particularly from your perspective, who's coming in, who's going out, who's staying? What's the future with that? What can you tell us?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I could bring up some data points on a slide here if that's useful, and talk through with folks here on the presentation this morning what that looks like, where we've been. And so I'm going to hit the share screen here, and hopefully I can dig out if I can find it on the screen.
Did you have trouble with Teams yesterday? I heard it went down all
I
across the country.
did. I had numerous problems, and then this morning Teams was good again. But what I'm not seeing here is on my own desktop, my presentation. So I'll just speak to the data points. I'll just use them here as a note feature for me. But I think, the interesting thing about this is what I'll start with, is we've been doing some meetings with policymakers, is that there's this recession that we're currently in, right? This COVID recession, we'll call it, is substantially different than the Great Recession of 10, 12 years ago. So that recession, as many of us know, really started in the real estate industry with the bubbles, right? And commercial and residential real estate. And the impacts of that recession were felt among skilled trades workers. So we heard the question earlier about, the electricians, the carpenters, the plumbers, spilled into other areas of the professional real estate market, those directly employed there, those in the marketing and sales areas of real estate, and sort of, impacted again, middle class people, as well as lower income folks. This recession clearly has taken a bite out of lower income folks almost exclusively. When we look at the data about who's been displaced, it's those hospitality, tourism, restaurant workers across not just parts of Wisconsin, like our college district represents, the Madison area, the Wisconsin Dells area, but tourism more broadly. And when we think about what happened again 10, 12 years ago as people were displaced, some of those people who might have been working those middle class jobs with good salaries, they might have been able to fund their own way to get a new career if they wanted to. And at that point in time, Pew Research indicated that about 1 in 2 people were raising their hand saying, yes, I need to go get reskilled or retrained to do something different. Again, in this current recession, the people impacted didn't necessarily have nest eggs to go and fund themselves to go back to college. They are more likely to say they need to get reskilled to do something new. About 2 out of 3 individuals are raising their hand saying, I need to go get reskilled, retrained, because I don't believe my job is going to be coming back, even as the economy continues to heal, as the pandemic continues to recede, hopefully. So that's that big framing piece right there. Is a very different type of experience than we've had 10 years ago. When we think about our college enrollment, what we did in the fall, we were looking with our board and talking to them about what the difference was between the fall of 2019 and the fall of 2020. And what we saw was, like many other community colleges across this country, a significant decline in our headcount. So the individual students coming to us, we lost about 11.5% enrollment compared to the prior fall. And when we look at what we call full-time equivalent students, which is just a way to add up 30 credit hours, and that equals 1 full-time equivalent student, that declined by a little under 10%. So however you looked at it, again, our enrollments were impacted. But when we dug deeper into the data, right, who was really not coming to our institution this fall of 2020? And it was really new students. Their enrollment declined by 19% compared to the prior year, 19%. So those students that were continuing with us and did not come back, so they were with us last spring of 20, but didn't come back into the fall of 20, we lost a little over 6% of them. So again, our big loss was among new students. So as we kind of continue to dive into what else is going on with the enrollments, again, we've had this big decline. So we do what I call the pizza analysis, right? We used to have a 16-inch pizza in terms of enrollment. This year we had a 12-inch pizza in terms of enrollment. But did the proportion of the slices change in any significant way, right? Did we cut it up differently? And when we looked at certain demographics within our population, what we saw was that for students of color, we did have a decline, right? Their proportion got smaller, but only by 0.5%. That's all students of color. No individual racial ethnic group had a decline greater than 0.4%. So yes, slippage among our students of color. Yes, meaningful. but not as dramatic as I would have thought from a proportion perspective. Again, we're just comparing proportions. Looking at our male students, however, their proportion declined by about 2.3%. So pretty significant there. Our youngest students, those under the age of 22, declined by about 1%. And again, looking at the proportions, those new students were a 3.3% decline. So we've been thinking about the issue of male students more recently in higher education broadly in the last couple of years, starting to raise the question, what's happening with male students? And when we look at, who was participating in our degree credit programs 4-year average prior to this current academic year we're in, we had a little under 46% of our students in degree credit programs were men. That slid down to 44% this fall. And the strange thing is, right, when we break our students out again between new students and those who are continuing students, when we start off with students, when we're looking at, the most recent fall compared to the average of the prior falls, not surprising, new students, 50-50 roughly, right? Men and women, which makes sense to us. That's what our population looks like. But when we look at who continues on as a student in subsequent semesters, it's about 58% of the women students do, only 44% of the male students do. And that has a further ripple effect, right, all the way into graduation, where, roughly of our graduates, roughly 6 in 10 are women, roughly 4 in 10 are men. So there's things happening there. And when we look at, again, male students by race and ethnicity, right, to better understand what might be happening to them over this period of time, we've seen that among our Latino students, our males, they have continued to proportionately increase over time. Their enrollment as new students and their enrollment as continuing students. That's good. That's healthy. Our Black student population, they've grown as new students, but they've declined as continuing students proportionately. And our other large population of people of color, students of color, Asian students, again, they've increased slightly as new students, and they've had slight declines as continuing students, but they do come back after more than one semester in a positive fashion, proportionately. But then we look at our white students, and they have declined both as new students and as continuing students. And so we're thinking about the male student. There's different experiences with those male students, but we know that collectively it's adding up to an area of focus for us. And so the past several years, we've been focused on what's going on in our classroom, right? Because even though part of my portfolio includes our student affairs, so those are our advisors, our counselors, our financial aid specialists that all work with students, their faculty member is who a student's going to spend the vast majority of their time with when they're at college. And, we think about what we can do differently. What can we do in the classroom to support those students? Because not only are we seeing that sort of lack of success, again, in terms of persistence and completion, but just looking at grades, for example, in our top enrolled courses, which are usually gatekeeper courses to other courses you need to take to complete your program of study. So think, oral communications, written communications, college algebra 1, intro to psychology, those types of courses. Our male students are only averaging C or better, only 66% of them. And that's more than 7% worse than their female colleagues. And when we look at their withdrawals, they withdraw at a slightly higher rate, by about 1.5%. And so those are things that we know we've got to focus on because when the male students do get through to those higher level courses, they're still not performing as well academically as their female counterparts, but that gap begins to close. They're only earning C's at a rate that's 4% less than their female colleagues. So that's a big area of continued focus for us, and not just Madison College, but this is true across higher education and really across, as I understand, all the industry sectors. So whether you're a 2-year institution or whether you're a 4-year institution, your men are not performing as well in your institution.
Tim,
yeah.
Tim, that is, I was just going to ask that if that's true. It's 4-year. And do you guys communicate pretty well with stuff like UW? I mean, the system in terms of comparing notes on that?
So I think that the conversation about what's been happening in male students in higher ed has primarily, and I'll say rightfully, focused on men of color. particularly Black and Latino males, because historically the issues of racism have really, hindered their ability both to access higher education and to be successful at those institutions once they arise. So there are definitely continued issues, right, with our men of color broadly, and in those two populations more specifically. And whether you're, again, a 4-year or a 2-year college, research has been focused on those populations. I think what's newer for us to think about a little bit is the white male population, which, right, at this time, at this moment in history, when we've talked about male privilege, white male privilege, excuse me, more specifically, and when we think about what that means, privilege is something. It's not necessarily economic privilege, right? So we're going to spend some time looking at, where are our white students not coming from that they may have been coming from in the past? And what are these other barriers or issues or challenges that they're facing, right? That's causing them not necessarily to be successful in higher education, because it is a bit of a head scratcher. It is not what most people think. I was at a presentation 2-3 years ago now, and it was a woman researcher who, she goes, the first time I heard that, there was issues with male students, I said, that can't be right at all. And she goes, then I started doing the research, and she goes, the numbers tell me otherwise, right? Very data-driven researcher. And again, I don't think we have as many good solutions in place for the male population as a whole. I think certain groups we've done more research around what we can do. And a lot of that's wraparound services. A lot of that's around how do they fit within the institution? What is their comfortability with walking the halls and the classrooms of your institution? What can you do in terms of hiring faculty and staff that reflect the diversity of the student population? It's something we're committed to at Madison College. Our student body is actually more diverse than the population of the district that we serve. Roughly 1 in 3 almost students now are a student of color, a little underneath that. 4 years ago, it was about 1 in 4. So our student body population has more students of color, but our workforce, excuse me one moment. Our workforce doesn't necessarily reflect that yet. And so we're focused on diversifying our workforce because that is impactful to students of color, men and women.
Have you seen a change in any of these since you opened your south side as opposed to the downtown? Have you broken that out in terms of the accessibility with the south side office?
Yeah, so when we opened our South Campus in the fall of 2019, that was our first semester at that new expanded space. And when we looked at the data, right, we were exceeding many of the goals we had set out for us in terms of attracting students from those zip codes in that area that we identified as the South Madison service area. And we were doing better than prior with enrolling students of color in particular. So it was having the desired impact. And then, of course, our second semester there, it got disrupted at the midway point. And so now there are a few, because of the way we've arranged our academic portfolio this academic year, we don't have a lot of face-to-face in-person course offerings at any of our campuses. And so part of that, right, might be one of the issues that not only Madison College, but other community colleges are facing in terms of enrollment, is that many of us, like Madison College, have this year, roughly, we had 70% of our courses offered completely remote. 25% of them in a hybrid format where students would come to campus to perform labs or demonstrate certain competencies for their faculty members. And then 5% completely face-to-face. And many of those had legal or accreditation requirements for that purpose. So as we strove to make faculty and students safe from the pandemic and change our course portfolio that way, it does have implications for who wants to, participate in higher education. The experience of young students that they might have had last spring when they're high schools, right? The graduates of the class of 20, when they went into remote, they might have said, well, if remote's on the menu of options here, is that really what I want to choose to pursue, given the experience I had as a high schooler? Now, I will say this, we've been doing remote education for 20 plus years. We provided significant support to our faculty members who hadn't been experienced in remote instruction to help them. In this summer, we've got roughly 425 full-time faculty and roughly another 450 each semester part-time. Typically, we had 425 total part and full-time, participate in workshops over the summer about how to do remote learning, how to use the technology platforms, how to restructure their curriculum so that it worked in this two-dimensional way. And so we've put forward great effort, I think, into that, because we have a center focused on teaching and learning. That was new to me when I came to the two-year colleges 10 years ago. I was like, wow. I don't recall at my alma mater, UW Green Bay or UW-Madison, where I did my graduate work, having a dedicated set of staff, many of them faculty or former faculty, focused on helping faculty in the classroom. And so with this switch to the remote environment, we actually augmented some of that with some of the federal funding that we had received last spring when we were displaced and Congress passed their first COVID Relief Act, because we knew we had to figure out how to make this environment work. Since that time, we've augmented not only staff people worried about the technology component and redoing your curriculum, but also some folks to help faculty think about equity mindedness, right? So how do instructors, again, in thinking about their curriculum and thinking about the technology, also continue to think about how to be more equity minded, and so that they're reaching and being inclusive of all the students that are in their classrooms or lab spaces.
So there's a couple of questions out there about what would loan forgiveness mean to people either coming back or starting careers there, starting taking classes? What would it mean?
So loan forgiveness, right, by definition implies that I've already taken out some loans and presumably consumed some education previously. So I think the loan forgiveness, depending on what type of student you are, right, it may simply free up household income, and so you're able to pay down debt, other debt that you might have, or make new investments in your household, whether it's in the education of younger people, if you've got younger people in your house, or whether it is to go back yourself, because you're like, hey, I did get a degree before, but I'm not comfortable, I'm not confident that my particular job or my particular occupation is going to come back as robustly as I might have been able to do in the past. So it'll provide some assistance, but I think the big thing is, again, it's been low income folks in this pandemic in particular that have been displaced, and they need grant aid. And the federal funding we've received to date have allowed us to make direct grants to students, including students who had not applied for financial aid. And so that, I think, continuing that focus on making sure students have the aid they need to get credit is going to be key to them getting degrees and then getting back into the workforce as the economy continues to heal and new occupations arise.
What are you hearing from employers about what the need is for the type of graduates you have? I assume they're in the conversation big time with you.
They are. And when we, both look at the data and when we're talking to employers, not surprisingly in South Central Wisconsin, areas of demand include healthcare. So we will continue to have demand for nurses at multiple levels. The RN, which is our 2-year associate degree, the practical nursing degree, which is a 1-year degree, as well as the CNA, which is the first credential in your healthcare pathway. We know that there are job openings in early childhood education in particular. Some of that might have been spurred by the health pandemic, right? If you couldn't have as many children in a facility due to the social distancing you needed to maintain, how long might this spike in demand last? It might be driven again by other changes, allowances, if you will, in social distancing that may allow more of those children to go into one physical space. On the other hand, maybe we need more physical spaces to support children, and therefore we need more early childhood educators. Other big area, no surprise, right? Information technology. And I picked up on part of that conversation, I think, earlier here this morning. So we prepare people for careers to, be help desk technicians. We prepare people to do IT security. Continues to be a hot topic in the media these days, given the world and the state of affairs. We again, continue to support and train people to manage the server systems, the farms, the cloud, whatever you might refer to it as in your life or your business. So we know those will be continued areas of demand. And, I know the issue of communication, which we identified about a year ago, right, is we were trying to communicate to our students and to our employees what we were going to do as we left at roughly the same time last year and said, we'll be gone for 2 weeks and then we think we'll come back. Which a year later, we're not back. But how do you communicate all that? And what is the value that businesses of all sorts are going to need to have people who can communicate graphically, communicate on social media platforms, communicate in longer form, in podcasts, right? To tell the story of your business and what it's doing and how it may have to continue to adjust, because this pandemic might not evolve in this linear fashion of each day, each month gets better, right? If you're a small business, you might have to pivot your operations if things go, bad, I'll call it again, from a pandemic perspective, re-educate your customers about how they're going to engage with you. Well, do you have those skill sets on your staff today? And if not, how are you going to get them?
So one of the things, and Scott mentions a little bit about this, I think it may maybe apply to it. One of the things that think about in terms of having enough skilled carpenters, for example, that you end up actually maybe doing more prefab houses because you don't have enough carpenters to go to all of the sites to build the homes. So because we're just not going to we're not getting people to go into the trades. I don't know if they just, it's not comfortable. That certainly the salaries seem to be there, but the interest and we were talking before you got on this, how is this going to be filled? Is it going to be by immigrants? Is it going to be because of higher wages? But using, for example, just carpentry as that example, that you can't put enough builders at each site because we don't have enough. So that changes things back to maybe prefab. And of course, Wisconsin's certainly set up. That's what we've done for a long time, the Wausau Homes and others. But is that happening in other ways where things will happen for jobs where they're more concentrated here because we don't have enough trades? I mean, you still got to get your plumbing fixed.
Right. So something I think new building, right, or is it lends itself to more automation in the process, right, to that prefabrication of components, the walls and the whatnot. But yes, eventually you're going to need skilled tradespeople to, the carpenter's got to work with the electrician, who's got to work with the plumber, who's got to maybe work with the mason to make everything work in terms of bringing a new facility into existence. I know there's been discussion, and this is older discussion too, about, how does robotics change the construction industry? And it's not a conversation I've had recently with folks, but even as much as, 8 to 10 years ago, there was discussion because, at that time, the industry was concerned about the aging of the baby boomers who were near the end of their career. And now, of course, many, many more of them have retired in that period of time. And so it's, well, how do you meet that labor force needs? And what, if you're prefabricating things, what type of robotics can help push up walls and do other things that maybe the existing equipment can't do today well? I think in the shop floors, right, going to manufacturing, I think we're going to see more automation and watch it get accelerated, right, and watch it plug into the Internet of Things, so that the data that can be collected about your manufacturing process can inform a smaller group of workers that are probably higher skilled to what they need to do to adjust something that might be going wrong. About maybe it was 5 years ago, been a while, but we were in Cardinal Glass. They've got a facility up in Portage. Walked into a giant room, I'm trying to size it right. It was probably about, 30 yards across and, 10, 15 yards deep, full of monitors. There's probably 8 to 10 technicians in there monitoring different components of the manufacturing process. And the manager who was giving us a tour at that time talked about how different the shop floor had looked compared to earlier in his career because of the effect of automation. And that's, comparatively speaking, glass is comparatively easy to make compared to other things that need to get produced. And so thinking about what automation means for that is something that's talked about. The question, I think, becomes, which businesses are going to be able to make those investments because they're not inexpensive investments for a manufacturer to make in a piece of equipment. And in South Central Wisconsin and really across Wisconsin, we've got a lot of smaller, right, fabricators and shops. Are they going to be able to do that type of automation to continue to be competitive? Their goal is to remain in business. And we'll do what we can to support them, of course, but that I think will be one of the longer term challenges for manufacturing.
Here's a question for both of you, and Kurt, you want to jump in on this too. I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal article yesterday, Hewlett Packard moving its manufacturing to Chippewa Falls because of climate change. So what does climate change do? How is climate change affecting, I don't know if you want to say it's the gig or both, the 2-year, the 4-year, the gig. And sometimes I do wonder whether the gig economy folks, I think people always think about them being like these genius folks who, and I wonder how many of them are really just hands-on people that are more traditional 2-year college to use stereotypes, as opposed to, the coming out of the 4-year degree with this wild idea, which is a separate issue. But on climate change, Scott, do you have any idea on that, about what it means?
Yeah, it will. We certainly have seen how climate change can truly disrupt a manufacturing pipeline. So when you look at whether it's Hewlett Packard, whether it's Dell, whether it's individuals who are thinking about from a workforce development perspective of what wildfires may do, what a more intense hurricane season may do. Folks are thinking through, if they're making a 20, 30-year investment into a place, which Hewlett Packard is thinking about, Wisconsin becomes a more attractive location for that physical investment. And I think about, if I was trying to think about where do I want to start a business right now that would take the type of investment of an advanced robotics manufacturing facility or a piece of a highly automated, highly skilled chip manufacturer, would I want to stick that on, in Miami right now? I would have certain concerns about sea level changes, and similarly in California around wildfires. So I think, climate change is going to still impact Wisconsin. There's a whole area of climate justice that we should certainly think about, on how climate could create refugees and how individuals, particularly those of color and those on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, are not going to face a resilient community in the same way. But we should certainly be using these types of investments and thinking about, everything in a climate lens.
And I think Scott's points are really well
Tim,
put.
for you in this, thinking about this,
I think, for us,
I was going to say,
so
Tim, thinking about this, if you're,
go ahead, Terry. I'm thinking about it in terms of, what businesses, right, then do come to Wisconsin, right? And who's going to make that type of investment, and therefore what type of workforce are they going to need? So, up in Eau Claire area, Chippewa Valley Technical College, right? What are they thinking about? Okay, Hewlett Packard's going to be in our backyard. What are they going to need to do that? And what role are we going to have as, in this case, Chippewa Valley Tech, as an institution in helping them get that workforce? Because we have some, Cray Computing's been there for a number of years. Maybe some of those are the right skills that you need, but you probably need a lot more to operate that facility. But I do think, on the broader question of climate change, I think it's only wise for businesses to begin to think about locating in places where they're not going to have their customers get disrupted due to those types of events, because that costs them money and potentially costs them that client. If I can't get my product to somebody because hurricane fill in the blank name has pounded Houston, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, we're not getting hit by any hurricanes up here in Wisconsin. Wildfires, not an issue yet. And, if I understand the climate science stuff I've been reading about, Wisconsin might look like, particularly this part of the state, southern Wisconsin, might look more like St. Louis, which feels uncomfortable and means more freezing rain as opposed to snow, which is not safe to drive in. But again, much less severe than hurricanes and earthquakes and fires. So I think we're well positioned that way.
Kurt, are you finding any of that in terms of recruiting, the type of folks you're recruiting, in terms of what lifestyle? I mean, Madison's supposed to be hot, really great, but you're hiring people who are not here.
We are, and our client base has been moving across the country, right? We used to serve only folks within about a 35-mile radius of Madison, but we're serving people across the state, across the U.S. at this point. So
you're in the tech industry, and you're got really high level folks. Are they 2-year degree?
They're all over the board. Some of my senior level folks never got a degree. They learned it as they did it. Some are 2-year degrees from Madison College, and we get several from there. Several from Herzing over time, and then a number of 4-year degrees.
So let's go to that question I wanted to ask both of those guys, all three of you actually. So there's nothing wrong with a 2-year degree. obviously. It doesn't reflect your creativity, I assume. It doesn't reflect how far you may go, what you might do. But again, I think there's this, in my mind, there's this idea that this fabulous thing comes from some sort of experience that you have at a 4-year degree with this great professor and going from there. What's your guys' take on all that?
I can start. I mean, so someone who's consumed a lot of education, a doctorate, master's degree, and a bachelor's degree. Obviously, I benefited from my experience, and my experience allowed me to do the types of things that I wanted to do. As a young person leaving high school, I began to think about a career in law because I wanted to positively impact people's lives. And, when I got to college and as I graduated, I narrowed my choices to, public policy school, law school, or urban planning. And I went the route of public policy and excited about the career path I've had. As I think about, my kids, so I've got an 18 and a 16-year-old, and I think about their friends, I'm thinking about the different choices that they might make, not because they aren't interesting, creative, smart, talented people, but because they're also looking for a return on their investment. And they're asking the question, well, if I spend this much time and I end up with this much debt, well, what does that really mean? And as they think about how they can learn differently, Kurt's point there about some of the folks he's hired, haven't gone to college at all. Now, sometimes my concern, and maybe others, is, okay, how do you learn the skills to work though collaboratively, right? Because almost everything that I can think of that you're going to need to do, you're going to need to learn how to collaborate with a team, to engage with customers, and to figure out how to move forward. And so how do we make sure that even at whatever level of education you're getting exposed to those other really valuable skills that are quote unquote soft skills, according to employers, right? Your ability to write, to communicate, to collaborate, cooperate. How do we make sure that folks have those skills regardless of industry or occupation they're going to pursue? And then I think that if you step out in the world for a while, you may end up coming back more frequently, is what we're going to see among younger folks. So maybe they come back and get an associate's degree. Some have come back to get a different associate degree to do their career changing. Some have gone on to the 4-year institution. Some folks with their 4-year degree have come to us. So I think that swirl was the term that we used about 10 years ago when I first started here. That swirl in terms of people's educational experiences is going to continue and only accelerate as we move forward. And there's more options in terms of how people can access education, not just what's in their geography anymore.
So, Scott, are the entrepreneurs the heroes of the world that we should all worship, or what?
One, you spend plenty of time with entrepreneurs, and we should absolutely not be the one that anybody should be worshiping. Most of us just get lucky once, and some of us sell that as hero worship. But what I would say is on the question of education, it really does become a time cost equation. If I'm searching for an answer and I'm looking for whether it's a tool or a skill that I'm looking to gain mastery of, there are now options online through telecommunication that I can simply pick up and sign on to learn from some of the world inspiring leaders. What I will say is there's a difference of name brand and recognition, though. If I'm trying to pick up, let's say, learn a systems program like R or a GIS mapping technology, I know the quality of education that I'm going to receive from the University of Wisconsin or the Madison College system that I may not know from a website that started 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't mean the website might not have, I may be able to look and be like, wow, here's an amazing professor who's going to teach me X, Y, and Z in an online curriculum that I will be learning from. But will that have the same value, dollars and cents, as well as the credentialed component that follows, that a traditional academic institution will provide? Now, I do think that we're going to see a metamorphosis that's going to occur inside the areas of higher education that Tim and others are already working on and have been thinking about during this pandemic. The marketplace for competition is going to increase, but I will say those higher education facilities, those higher learnings of higher education have quite a bit head start on everyone else.
Tim, do you see an increase in the number of terminal degrees, like certificate degrees, or with the certificate degrees, or 2-year, I guess? I mean, some of them are 1-year degree, 1-year certificates.
So we have begun at most 2-year institutions, and us and the other 2-year tech colleges in Wisconsin have been debundling our 2-year degrees, right? So that if you earn a certain number of credits, you may get a certificate, you may then get the diploma, and then get the degree. And we've done that because we know that our students sometimes stop out, right? Because life happens to them. The average age of our students is 26 right now, and it's been higher in the past when I first got at the college because of the Great Recession. I imagine that it'll increase again as people return back to the college. And so if you can get enough competencies to get a credential that's valuable to employers, that's the key part for us. Like, employers need to see value in it. It doesn't matter if we as the educators say, hey, we've given you something because we believe it's valuable. If the workplace says, I don't believe you can perform the GIS type of competencies that Scott just articulated, then it doesn't matter, right? Then we need to make sure that you get some additional credentials to get that degree, so that Scott goes, yep, now I know you've got the competencies to do this type of GIS work that we want done in our firm. And so that debundling has occurred, and it's mostly been a good thing for our students. And it's also a good thing for those returning, right? So if I've already got a degree and maybe I'm like, I don't have another 2 years in me at this point in my life, right? Can I get, something that's shorter that again is meaningful and will get me employed, and combined with the skills and talents I already have, right? Great. Now I can go and sell myself in doing some kind of career switch.
When did you start the as you put it, unbundling? What time frame are we talking about?
It's been evolving since I first got to the college. So I remember when I got there, they began thinking about starting with our developmental programs, doing bridge programs. So those individuals who might not have yet had their high school degree, how do we begin to marry that with degree credit competencies, so that again, we can accelerate the student through an experience and get them back into the workforce more quickly. But then it began further up the chain, right? Starting from day one of a degree credit program, and it's a 2-year degree. Well, what does that look like at 1 year? Or what does it look like at, a year and a half or 1 semester? And again, does it make sense for industry? Our employer is going to see value in a credit, or a credential that's awarded after a short period of time. The other thing we've done outside of the degree credit space through our continued education program is started badging. And we started that about 10 years ago too, and we're really recognized as a national leader in that. So that you're not coming in to get a typical degree at all, but you're getting something that indicates that you've got a certain set of competencies. And some of those are recognized by industry. We've partnered with certain employers to create those badges that might be of value to that particular employer, because they don't have the capacity in-house to do the teaching and training and curriculum development and all that goes into teaching somebody something. So that's another way in which we're looking to, again, credential individuals, but it needs to be something that that employers will see as of value. And so it's accelerated over my 10 years at the college. And I imagine, particularly in the digital badge space, we're thinking that'll become a really attractive space for, again, displaced individuals who might not, again, I don't have another year to give to get back into the workforce, or 2 years. What do I already have? What could I get that with what I already have makes me employable again in a different industry or occupation? Because I don't think that's coming back in that other space I used to be in.
How popular, Tim, is the, again, part of this issue about big tech is get rich quick, and you've got to have a tech thing to be successful, which I think is part of why I don't want to be a carpenter or electrician is I want to do this big tech thing. But gaming in Wisconsin, doing the design games, do you guys have a lot of interest in what do you guys do for that type of skills, getting kids ready for that kind of coding or that kind of work?
Yeah. So I know more about what we've done on the art side, right? Through our graphic arts, and I'm probably not in animation and those types of disciplines that feed into it. I'm not sure, and that's only because I'm not sure of what level of detail we prepare people from the coding perspective. But again, the visualization, the visual communications, we do prepare people on that end of the spectrum. I know for certain. They usually have big shows in the spring, not this spring, not last spring, but hopefully when we gather again, they'll be able to have big shows where they demonstrate their work, right? They're putting out their portfolios, and that's a chance for employers to come in, see them, and understand what they've learned in a variety of our visual communications and digital arts programs.
Yeah, and I was interested. I think one of my friend's sons or somebody is a graphic designer for Harley, and what you think there would be. I would think that would be something to go with Scott with a gig economy, that a big company like Harley would actually hire a graphic design artist person to figure out, what the new logo will be on that motorcycle or the new electric motorcycle. And in my mind, that would have been a perfect gig economy kind of consultant thing. And I don't know how many people are, big companies would still take on that. But I'm pretty sure he's one of your grads, and he's out there working for Harley doing graphic design, which was phenomenal to me.
Yeah.
What gets missed in the conversation about tech jobs is how many non-technical jobs are actually created to support one engineer. So when you look at some of the key advancements, like certainly if you're thinking about, I'm developing an algorithm for Google, you need to be at that highest level PhD level. But for most of the applications that we all use every single day, you have graphic designers, you have support staff, you may be doing front-end development that you could obtain the necessary degree sets over a 2 or 4 year period. There's so much more to unpack than just your senior level engineer at even some of the most basic companies.
But that's interesting. One of the programs I'm working with in Milwaukee that we're doing with a thing about sports as a attraction for kids to get into careers, and just like the big high tech Bezos folks are the ones at the top, and Giannis and those at the top. If you look at all the jobs, you need to design the uniform, you need to run the scoreboard, you need to be an official, you need to be managing the stadium, the parking, the food, the safety, the security, all of those things. And so while we focus on somebody who bounces the ball and throws it like Aaron Rodgers in football, it's all of those things that we're using as a hook to try to get kids to do some more of these things. And so I see that. I think that's a great point, Scott. It's something that I've cared a lot about. You can be the sophomore girl in high school running the scoreboard for the basketball team, and that leads you to a career doing the jumbotron because you understand and you learn that stuff. But everybody wants to be Giannis or Aaron or Bezos or whoever.
Or even that example, right? I mean, further behind the scenes things associated with an athletic team, right? They've got a marketing department, they've got accountants, they've got data scientists up the wazoo nowadays in sports. And it started here in the US and that's being exported elsewhere, right? I mean, baseball was the original data-driven sport, but now every sport is trying to figure out in a proprietary way in some ways, what should we be looking at? What should we be measuring? So as we evaluate talent and who we're going to sign and who we're not going to sign, how do we make that decision? So there's a lot that goes on, to your point, with just one basketball team in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, using the Bucks example.
Yeah. Nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about that in terms of that. I think I remember when I was at Marquette, it was Bo Ellis under Al McGuire. Bo Ellis he was a graphics and fabric. I don't know what it would be called at this point, but it was he designed those shorts that were actually no longer up by their crotch; they were down by their knees. And that was Bo Ellis designing that, and Al McGuire agreed to do it. And of course, then you have designs of fabric and shoes, everything with that. It's a fascinating piece of this. I want to run a couple of things. Jay Loy shared with us from QTI his survey of 2021 employers, what they expected going on. And I just want to run through a couple of them. You might have random reactions in these last 10 minutes, but Scott, based on what you were giving us about numbers, he said that 3.6% of employees worked remotely. I know you gave us millions. He's saying only 3.6% of employees worked remotely, and now it's 62%. only 12% of employers were giving any kind of home support, like for internet or office supplies, and that was about average about $50 a month for working remotely. That's now up to about 15% of people will be giving you a benefit for running your home office. He said that for hiring, about 30% are all virtual. If you're going to be hiring someone, 5% are still in person, and the rest are all hybrid. And that's also spread out over several days of Zooming. He said that the benefits that a company gives, and this goes to what you're saying, Tim, about going back to school. If they give you, I will match with a 401k, but you can decide that match, will it go to pay off your student loan? Will it go off to help you develop more? Do you want to put it 401k? That's up to you. It said that let's see, they're working a lot on the flexibility, again, about the flexible work arrangements, including no meeting Fridays because of Zoom fatigue. And then the biggest issue for them, and it's the first time it's ever been at the top of their survey for HR, and this has been done for a decade over hundreds of employers. It's never been at the top, is health and safety, and engagement. So basically, that you want to keep working for this company, you want to give it all as we measure what productivity is, but also that we want to do it in a way that's healthy and safe. So I don't know if any of those jump out for any of you want to have a comment on before we fade off here or not, but that's his 2021 human resources trends. The numbers sound about right to you in terms of 60% working from remotely now. And of course, no one knows how many are coming back, but.
So I'll say it's a little bit reassuring that Jay and I are using the same statistics. I converted them just out to the population levels, but I think at the way I look at this is the pandemic accelerated a number of different trends that we saw that would otherwise have probably taken a decade to see inside the market. And there's going to be pros and cons to all of this. We should be mindful that many of these things are not good nor bad. It's a value judgment that we place on it, and we should be mindful that this is going to change what our public policies are going to be. Whether we've talked primarily about education, but there's going to be a number of social policies that are going to radically change due to this new composition, and it's being mindful of that, and it's looking at the data to see everything from climate change on forward, how this is going to change our new way we think about work in the United States.
I think this evolution is what is the word we've been using as we're talking about planning for the future of just our work at the college, not the job markets for our students, but just how do we do our work at the college of teaching and serving students. And when we think about where we are today in terms of primarily a remote teaching and service environment, what does next academic year look like? And we're beginning to plan for that, and we're like, well, we're gonna look different than we did this academic year, but we're not likely to look like 2019. And do we take another step forward in spring of 2022 and by fall of 2022 as we continue to hopefully leave the pandemic, recognizing that COVID is going to be with us, and so it's going to be a factor that's out there for consideration of safety and health, which Jay's survey indicated was a big factor for employees, and I believe will continue to be a big factor for employees moving forward, because this is going to be a bit of an uncertain time, even as we are cautiously optimistic that it'll be better health-wise as people get vaccinated, and that hopefully tamps down the spread of the disease. So things will switch, things will evolve, and things might regress a little bit too on this mix of working from your employer's place of business to working from home.
Well, before I want to say thank you both. I hope, Tim, good luck, particularly on solving this white male thing. I'm always thinks about the fact that we invented teenagehood 100 years ago, 1916, 17, 18, when we stopped child labor. And so
Right.
teenagehood was invented. And so what do we do with these kids now that they're not working in the factories? And now 100 years later, it seems like we have now invented something beyond college where it doesn't, now there's that between 19, when you're 20 years old to you're really about 30,
Right.
particularly for men, it seems like, it seems to me we've invented this new thing because of how much education, how complicated society is, expectations. I don't know, but as you do your survey to figure out what happened to the disappearing white male college student, I'd say in journalism, I had this conversation not long ago, is, primarily been women in journalism for many years now, in grad school. And if you look at who are your reporters, who are your anchors, more and more. I want to thank Scott and Tim, particularly, and Kurt for helping to connect me with these guys. And I'm going to turn it over to another bald man.
Hey, what kind of an introduction is that, Terry? Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Scott and Tim. Tim, good to see you again.
Good to see you,
In a
Dennis.
while. And again, thanks to Terry and to Kurt for setting this up. This is a really great session. And I know we've learned a lot about the trends. It was good to get the perspective of employers from Scott and Kurt, and from Tim dealing with the individual who's making decisions about what their options are and how they can prepare for the work of today and in the future. That's all been very good. Next time we get together will be in 3 weeks, April 6th, and we're going to be focusing on a lot of the issues that came up today, of the implications this time on housing and on office space and the like, dealing with housing issues that came up today about the implications of working from home on housing and where people are living. Obviously, affordable housing is always an issue. Another issue that we've had for a long time, and is another one that we'll focus on too, is what's the future of State Street? That's been a Madison concern for a long time and continues to be. And then office space and the like. So with that, happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone.
Green beer. Go get your Guinness, Dennis.
All right, you bet.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.
Thank you all.